Please be seated. Don't allow yourself, nor the people that you will serve, to live under the delusion that the Bible is a dry and dusty book, completely somber at all times. In parts of it, it is laugh out loud funny, including today's gospel. See, Jesus is a spiritual teacher using metaphors and imagery to impart wisdom. And he's been doing that now for 8 chapters in Mark's gospel. So he's using this image, this metaphor of the yeast of Herod and the Pharisees. And these clowns think he's talking about real bread. And then it gets even sillier when you realize Jesus has, not many verses ago, just transformed a few loaves into many for thousands of people. And the disciples say, well, it's because we don't have any bread. Forgetting that Jesus is the one who can make bread and abundance out of scarcity. Humor in the hands of a good writer or comedian can be used like that. To make a deeper point by blowing something up to the nth degree so we're disarmed in our laughter and so we can really see it for what it is. You all have seen Saturday Night Live, right? Oh no, everybody fell asleep already. Right? So you all have seen it before, right? Yes. And in its best episodes, it employs this kind of humor to make a deeper point. Maybe you all remember Church Lady? Yes. Yeah. With that passive-aggressive catchphrase, "Isn't that special?" And her superior dance, when she had proved that somebody else was inferior to her. Blows up this image of judgment and superiority so we can see it for its absurdity and toxicity. Or a more recent one, remember Debbie Downer? And she's on this vacation with her friends and family to Disney World. And everybody's talking about what they're excited to do. And then she keeps relating all of their things they want to do to stuff like killer bees and rising incidents of feline AIDS. Giving an example of what negativity can how that can bring the whole mood down and be a toxic thing. So it's using humor to blow something up, and even though it looks silly, it's making a serious point that we can only really see through the absurdity. And I think that that's what Mark is doing here with the disciples. He's kind of doing a disciple dude skit, making them into a character. Now, according to the internet, dudes is becoming a gender-inclusive term, which I support. We should keep using dudes that way so it catches on. But in any case, Mark is sort of making the disciples into this larger-than-life character, really blowing up to an absurd and silly degree the way that they are failing to listen to Jesus and perceive what he is doing. And through this, as sort of a side note, I think Mark is giving us biblical precedent for using humor in our preaching and in our teaching, using humor not just to get people's attention or get laughs, but use it in a deeper way that points to spiritual truth. For when we hear Mark depicting the disciples in this silly way, we laugh until we realize that we are disciples too, and that we too sometimes also in these absurd ways fail to listen to what Jesus is saying and doing. Now Jesus is talking about the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. And for you bread bakers and carb lovers, know that yeast is actually not typically in the Bible a positive image. It's usually a negative one. Because just a little bit of yeast goes through this whole big loaf this whole big bowl of dough in order to make a loaf of bread, illustrating how just a little bit of evil can cause great destruction and corruption. And remember that in the story of the Passover, Israel is commanded to throw out their leavened bread, throw out products with yeast as this image of corruption. So Jesus is pointing to how just a little bit of the evil of Herod and the Pharisees can be so destructive, and how the church is called to notice and resist this kind of evil. Jesus is calling us to be spiritual leaders who lead the church as an alternative community to this world's powers of Herod, to this world's powers of greed and violence and prejudice and division. Jesus is calling us to be spiritual leaders who cultivate churches as alternative communities to religious yeast, to church gone wrong that hurts people with prejudice and homophobia and racism and classism and cliquishness and all kinds of other hurtful things. Jesus is calling us to be leaders who resist this kind of yeast and lead churches that help bring the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. Well, how do we do that? Of course, that's the million-dollar question, but I think Mark gives us a piece of that answer by pointing us to the need to trust in Jesus. That when we trust in Jesus, we are grounded enough to resist this world's powers of evil. See, that's where the disciples seem to get off track. They forgot that Jesus is the one who multiplies scarcity into abundance. They forgot that Jesus feeds us and provides for us and gives us everything they need. And in their distraction and anxiety about bread, they're no longer grounded enough to live out this role of resistance to this world's powers of evil. When we are grounded in the truth, when we remember that Jesus is the one who feeds and provides and is more than enough, then we are enabled to join with him in resisting this world's powers of evil. And a time, many times, will come in our ministries where we're faced with that choice. Are we going to get caught up in the day-to-day, daily grind of preparing for yet another Sunday, which seems to come once a week? Will we get caught up in the grind of the paperwork and the looking over the budget and the meetings, which are all important and nourishing like bread, but which are not enough to fulfill the fullness of Jesus' vision for the church? Will we get caught up in these things and miss out, get distracted as the disciples do from our mission of also resisting this world's powers of evil? A time, for example, may come in our ministries where we'll get to a town and learn that old Sheriff Herod at the county jail is not allowing any more Bible studies or worship services for inmates. It's too expensive for staff costs anytime they get out of their cells. And that old Sheriff Herod has decided that there's not going to be any in-person visits, not even through glass, but you've got to pay to make an account on this website and pay to start a phone call and pay per minute and pay to read a letter through email too. What will we do? Will we speak out? Will we draw people's attention to this injustice, even though it might be kind of uncomfortable because a lot of our people might not be used to even thinking of folks in prison as people to be concerned about? Will we push through the discomfort and draw attention to issues of justice? Will we dare to go tell old Herod that Jesus is calling us to come lead a monthly service at the jail? And so meet the Christ who told us in Matthew 25, he'll come visit us in the prisoner. Will we dare to push past our own discomfort, our own awkwardness, our own fear of being unpopular to resist the yeast of Herod? When we are grounded in the truth that Jesus provides, that he gives us words we didn't know we had, courage we didn't know we were capable of, strength that we never knew God could give us, when we recognize Jesus does all of these things and is our own source of bread, nourishment, identity, and sustenance, then we have the courage to stand for justice in a world, perhaps even in a church where it's unpopular. Or perhaps a finance committee in a church we'll serve will find money to fix up the steeple and redo all the carpet, but won't have enough money to fund a new member's vision for a cookout in the park across from the housing projects. Will we beware of the yeast of the Pharisees? Or maybe we'll find ourselves serving a church in which the welcome team is full of words of welcome and hospitality for well-dressed folks from respectable families, but barely grunts a word of acknowledgement when a mentally challenged man in sweatpants comes through the door. Beware the yeast of the Pharisees. What will we do when we're serving in a town where one of the biggest employers is actually engaging in systematic wage theft and barely paying people a living wage, and there's rumors of workers getting together to do something, maybe even start a union? Will we speak up? Or will we stay silent, stay neutral, afraid of offending the wrong person or the biggest tithers? Beware of the yeast of Herod. These moments will come in our ministry, and we are called by Jesus to remember that he gives us strength. We're called to remember that, as we will again when we come to this table, that Jesus feeds us. He nourishes us. He fills us with his spirit, his courage, his strength, his words, his wisdom, his affirmation of us. And in Jesus, we have more than enough. And when we trust in that good news, then we can begin to stand firm against this world's powers of evil. Then we can begin to lead churches that live out Jesus' alternative community of love, of welcome, of a table set wide, where sinners of all kinds are welcome to eat at the table of the Lord. Let's draw on Christ's nourishment and strength and live out his abundant welcome and his justice. Amen. Amen.